I've always tried to keep myself grounded in reality. Ironically, the reality is that this hasn't always happened. Instead, I've usually found myself, and often still do, grounded in my perception. Often I'd colour this reality with terms such as, yeah, my gut instinct is, or my waters are telling me, and my experience also tells me that. I got along just fine like this, but there were plenty of times when my perception of a challenging situation was actually totally warping the reality that I was facing. Sometimes my perception would make reality far more complicated than it needed to be. Sometimes my perception would get in the way of finding out the truth about something. Sometimes my perception would make me, avoid making an important decision on something. And sometimes my perception would wake me up in the middle of the night and torture me there, flowing through multiple angles and scenarios, mostly completely useless. I made many decisions at 3 a.m. that never made it to the light of day. Over time, I gained a few tools that would help me question my perception in regards to the reality in front of me. My favourite was to simply journal what was going on. I'd write out the scenario, which in itself often altered my perception, and then asked 5 questions. How do I know this is true? What is the worst thing that will happen if this is true? What's the best outcome expected if this is true? What's the likely thing that will happen if this is true? Who's this really about? Is it even my problem? What can I do about it right now? Many times as a leader, I'd hear myself telling myself when confronted with an issue by someone else, your perception is my new reality. And this was like a call to arms for me. It would remind me that everyone sees things from their own perspective, and that as a leader, I needed to be nimble and flexible enough to consider all these perspectives. Way back, sometime last century, when I was a young principal in a small school nestled under a mountain, an educational consultant came to visit. In those days, he was called a rural advisor. At the time, I was grappling with lots of challenges, and I was worried that the decisions I made were clouded by the perceptions that I had. I was 26 years old, and I really had no idea how to be a principal, let alone make decisions on the behalf of a rural community. He told me to always remain open-minded, and that although I'd be called upon to make decisions based on what I thought was reality, that I should never become overly attached to a particular viewpoint, that I should be prepared to change my mind if need be, and that this was more than just okay, it was what great leaders do. There have been many times when my perception has forced me to forget this advice, but yet reality still came knocking. My advice to you is the same. Always be prepared to adjust your perception about something, be open-minded, and don't listen to anything your mind tells you at 3 a.m. Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to bring you this leadership module. Today we're talking about reality bites, and in particular how our perception of things and the reality of them may well differ, and why it's important as a leader to take the time to understand what really is real in your workplace. So let's get into it. A strong leader recognizes that the gap between perception and reality in the workplace isn't just an abstract idea. It directly impacts their decision making, team morale, and the overall culture of the organization. Perception is how employees, stakeholders, and outsiders see the organization, its culture, leadership effectiveness, and overall direction. But reality is what's actually happening, the data results, and the underlying issues beneath the surface. Leaders who rely too much on perception might fall into a trap of believing their workplace is thriving because of outward appearances, while ignoring deeper problems like burnout, disengagement, or inefficiencies. On the other hand, those who focus solely on reality may struggle with messaging, failing to align employees around shared vision. And the best leaders try to close this gap by staying informed, seeking unfiltered feedback, and making decisions based on both how things appear and how they truly function. The gap between perception and reality will always exist. You as a leader need to understand that you're as human as anyone else on the team, and that you're also affected by the reality perception gap. Being self-aware is crucial in your leadership life, Knowing how and when to question your perception is very important, as is recognizing that you have a number of psychological filters constantly in play. Ironically, perception often turns into reality. Leaders need to be aware that this too comes into play for every human on your team. Reality is that everyone's reality is constantly changing. We find ourselves in a situation, we perceive it as how we see it, and this is based on a whole heap of things, including your past experiences, your upbringing, your values, your culture, just to name a few. And then there's reality, the actual reality, the situation that you find yourself in. Our minds take this and combine the two in a way of adjusting your worldview. And from this comes your new reality. This new reality might be skewed by a whole heap of things. So what can we do to question our perception of things before it all turns into your new reality? Firstly, it's important to understand that you have a whole heap of biases that you base your perception on. More about this in a minute. Secondly, it's more than useful to seek evidence. Where's the proof of your perception? Where are the receipts? And finally, probably the hardest thing of all, trying to stay open-minded. Okay, so let's take a quick look into these things called cognitive biases. Well, you might be amazed to learn that there are many cognitive biases, far more than most people realize. Researchers now believe that there are over 180 distinct biases that affect our thinking, decision-making, and behavior. These biases influence everything from memory and perception to judgment and problem-solving. Some well-known examples include the confirmation bias, which is favoring information that supports your existing beliefs. Another one is anchoring bias, which is relying too heavily on the first piece of information that you receive. Or the sunk cost fallacy, when people continue investing time, money, or effort into something just because they've already spent resources on it, even when logic tells them that they should just cut their losses and move on. And then there's the availability heuristic, which is judging likelihood based on easily recalled examples. The sheer number of biases highlights how complex and imperfect our human cognition can be. As I said, apparently there's now over 180 of these in play. You likely have a bias that's very common though. I'm sure that some of the 180 will be particularly obscure. And it's likely that the bias that you tend to use most often is in play for the majority of time. It's like your favorite go-to toy. We tend to rely on the same biases repeatedly because they provide a sense of certainty and reinforce our existing beliefs, making us feel more confident in our choices. Okay, so how do we go about finding if your perceptions are actually based on fact? When you want to test whether your perception aligns with reality, there are some really powerful questions to ask, such as, what sources support my perception and are they credible? Are you relying on first-hand experience, expert opinion, or just anecdotal evidence? Another good question is, what would prove me wrong? Actively seek counter evidence. If none exists, your perception might actually be solid. If counter evidence exists, well, it's worth reconsidering. And how about this for a question? Is my evidence based on emotion or logic? Feelings can be valid, but when seeking objective truth, logical reasoning should take precedence. And maybe this is the best one. How do others see this? Getting diverse perspectives can help reveal any blind spots that you might be having. Grounding yourself in reality is very important. It helps you stay open-minded about a particular issue, and it also helps you accurately align your emotions with what's actually happening. Your emotions then in turn help you choose your most appropriate reaction. Staying open-minded means being aware of the biases that you like to use, being curious about what the data really tells you, and then asking others how they see the issue. Consulting is a great way to stay grounded for sure. Of course, everyone on the planet is running along with their own take on reality. So what can you do as a leader to ensure that reality remains at the fore? Firstly, you've got to encourage open communication. Create a culture where team members feel safe to express their concerns and ask questions. Transparency helps bridge gaps between perception and reality. Secondly, clarify expectations. Misaligned expectations often lead to misunderstandings. Clearly define roles, responsibilities, and goals to ensure that everyone's on the same page. Use data and facts. When addressing perception issues, rely on objective data rather than assumptions. This helps ground discussions in reality. Foster empathy and understanding. Encourage your team members to consider different perspectives. Acknowledging all the diverse viewpoints can reduce conflicts and improve collaboration. Regular check-ins is also important. Conduct frequent one-on-one and team meetings to assess alignment between perception and reality. This allows leaders to course correct before misunderstandings can escalate. And consider providing training and development. Equip team members with skills to critically assess situations and differentiate perception from reality. Okay, so we're almost there. The key here is to understand that there's always a gap between perception and reality, and that your role is to make sure that that gap is as small as possible. So take time to be aware that there will always be some sort of gap. Be curious about your perceptions and about what the evidence really states. Ask around, find out what other people think. Remember though, their opinion is also a perception. And when you're confident that you understand what your new reality actually is, then act upon it. Chances are that your perceptions are pretty accurate. You've lived a lifetime of experiences after all. But it's always useful to keep in mind that these perceptions are often shaped by our beliefs and our experiences and our expectations. Reality, on the other hand, exists beyond our biases. The challenge, of course, is to expand our understanding, to look beyond any illusions, and to embrace truth even when it defies what we thought we knew.